Malara's Lament. Chapter 1. Echoes of a Happy Life. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the fields of Iredale, a quaint village nestled between the lush forests of Lunar Vale and the rolling hills of Ardath. The laughter of children and the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air. Malara hummed a soft lullaby while plucking petals from vibrant lilies in her garden. Her two children played nearby, their joyful shouts and giggles a melody she carried in her heart. Her husband, a sturdy yet gentle man with eyes like the clear sky, was in the distance, repairing their old wooden fence. He glanced back at her and their eyes met, a silent conversation of love, gratitude, and contentment. Malara watched her children as they ran through the garden, their faces radiant with happiness. Her daughter, delicate and curious, picked a dandelion and ran towards Malara, a dirt-smudged grin on her tiny face.
"For you, Mama!"
she chirped, her voice bright like the morning bells. Malara smiled, taking the flower and tucking it behind her ear.
"My little sunbeam,"
she whispered, lifting her daughter in a twirl that made her giggle.
"Grow up big and strong. Perhaps one day you'll be granted power as strong as Luna, your very own moonstone."
Her son, seeing the fun, grinned wildly and dropped his fistful of sticks, abandoning his makeshift fort to run over, demanding his turn.
"Me too, Mama,"
he cried. Malara laughed and obliged, spinning him until his shrieks of joy filled the air. She felt the warmth of her husband's embrace as he wrapped his strong arms around all three of them, his laughter blending with theirs. She turned to him, their smiles meeting, and she leaned in to kiss him tenderly. As they held each other, she felt a sense of peace settle over them.
"Our simple life,"
she thought, the words feeling both comforting and distant. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself daydream in his embrace.
"It's wonderful, but it could be better. One day, when the children are grown, I'll ask for more. But for now..."
Malara sighed contentedly, smiling lovingly at the dream of a future yet to come. For a moment, time felt suspended. The world was small and complete. But the moment began to slip away. Her husband's embrace loosened, and when Malara looked back, the warmth of his arms turned cold. The air thickened as tendrils of dark smoke began to wrap around her family, pulling them away. The laughter was swallowed by silence, and the fragrance of flowers was replaced by the bitter stench of burning. Her daughter's giggle turned into a cry.
"Mama, it hurts."
The little girl whimpered, clutching her stomach where blood pooled, staining the white fabric of her dress. Her son's tiny hand reached for Malara, his eyes wide with terror. She tried to grasp it, but he was wrenched away by a force she couldn't see.
"No!"
she cried, her voice tearing at the silence that had settled like a heavy fog.
"Was it not what you asked for, Malara?"
A voice taunted, deep and resonant, like distant thunder rolling across the hills.
"You wanted more? More power, more control, more than the life fate had dealt you, and I granted it, did I not?"
"No."
Malara's voice cracked, trembling with a mixture of anger and despair.
"This isn't what I wanted. I made the pact for them, for my family, but you took them."
From the smoke, a figure emerged, shadowy and imposing. His eyes burned like embers, and his smile twisted the darkness around him. He stepped closer, his voice a chilling whisper that seemed to echo in Malara's mind.
"I only took what you offered, foolish girl. A promise made, a price paid. Your desires betrayed you. This suffering is your own doing."
Malara's knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, her hands trembling uncontrollably. The whispers of the shadows had seduced her, promising strength and safety. Desperation had driven her to seek power to protect what she loved. She thought she was making a sacrifice for her family, but instead, the cost was her family. Now, everything she held dear was crumbling like ash between her fingers.
"No, lies, all lies."
Malara whispered, her voice trembling with rage.
"I was tricked, cheated, robbed. You whispered lies, but I will have the truth."
The shadow's laughter grew, filling the air with its cruel mockery.
Desperation is a dangerous path, Malara. It consumes you, and it leaves you shattered.
As the world crumbled around her, Malara felt her heart shatter with it. The warmth she once held had turned to ice, and the love that had filled her now only deepened her agony. Her sorrow, her anger, and her regret blended into a storm inside her, leaving her lost in the wreckage of a life she once cherished. Chapter 2. The Curse of the Crystal Lake. Malara jolted awake, gasping for air as the remnants of her dreams slipped away like water through her fingers. She found herself at the edge of the Crystal Lake, a serene yet foreboding body of water in the heart of the ancient enchanted forest of Verdantia. The glassy surface reflected the pale moonlight, along with Malara's disheveled appearance. Her fingers, slick with sweat, pressed against her wound, and she winced as pain flared, both from the injury and the memories that clung to her like shadows.
This vile, wretched place.
She spat, her voice trembling with anger and weariness.
Why now?
The water shimmered in response, and Malara heard a faint giggle, a childlike sound that seemed to echo from the ripples, familiar and taunting, as if in mockery. She stiffened, glancing around, but saw nothing but the moonlit reflections dancing on the water's surface. Then, a figure emerged in the reflection. A man approaching, his footsteps silent on the grass. He was a striking presence, with ebony skin and eyes of molten gold that gleamed with a predatory intensity. His hair, the color of sunlight, flowed in loose waves down his back. Even in her weakened state, Malara's eyes narrowed in recognition. Akoro, known as the Golden Blade. To the world, he was a hero of legends, but to Malara, he was a liar draped in glory. A dangerous figure who had managed to deceive everyone, including her. Akoro stopped just a few paces away, crouching beside her. His gaze flicked over her, cold and analytical, as though assessing prey caught in a trap.
I found you barely clinging to life,
he said, his voice unsettlingly calm.
but I figured we should finish our little arrangement before you slip away.
Malara forced herself to meet his piercing stare, every nerve in her body screaming to flinch. Akoro's face was a mask of confidence, his every movement deliberate, calculated. Slowly, he reached into his cloak and withdrew a small vial, its iridescent liquid shifting in mesmerizing patterns.
The mist of time.
Malara murmured, her voice betraying her disbelief. She hadn't expected him to actually retrieve it.
Per our deal.
Akoro confirmed, his lips curving into a slight smirk.
It won't change what's been done, but it might reveal the truth, if you're clever enough to use it. Of course, without the codex. Well, I imagine that's going to be a challenge.
Malara's heart pounded as the terms of their deal replayed in her mind. A desperate pact, a bid to uncover the truth she had lost to shadows and twisted intentions. How did Akoro find out about the Vale Keeper's codex? Its secrets were meant to be carefully guarded.
It doesn't matter.
Malara reminded herself. The codex was lost, along with that backstabber mimic and those 3 siblings when the Tower of Maze collapsed. She had barely escaped with her life. Now, Akoro stood before her. Their dark bargain hung between them like a blade ready to fall. She could feel the absence of the fragment of thorn, taken from her while she was unconscious, and the reality of her situation began to sink in.
You already have the fragment.
Malara said, her voice tight with suspicion.
So why are you still here? Leave the vial and go.
Akoro tilted his head, pretending to ponder her words, though his eyes flashed with irritation.
Oh, I'm no fool, Malara.
He replied, his tone almost lazy.
The curse you bound to the root is inconvenient. No swordplay or spellcraft could undo that clever knot you tied.
Malara felt a flicker of doubt as she saw the confidence in Akoro's posture. It reminded her of the shadow creature's whispers in the darkness and the moment she chose to make the pact. The regret. She had been so certain it was the only way to keep her family safe, but she hadn't realized just how steep the cost would be. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Not to this man, or it would be her undoing.
Give me the vial.
Malara said, her voice steady with forced confidence.
and I'll unbind the curse on the fragment.
Okoro's gaze sharpened, the amusement vanishing from his eyes.
Is that so?
He said, his voice dropping to a cold whisper.
If you think for a moment that you'll survive this, you've grossly overestimated your value, witch.
Melara's heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. She knew the danger she was in. Regret weighed heavily on her, mingling with the bitterness of her own failure. She couldn't save her family. She couldn't even save herself from the consequences of her choices. And now, the only thing standing between her and a grim fate was a curse she had barely managed to bind to the fragment of thorn.
Well,
Melara thought,
at least this wasn't a betrayal born of trickery like the shadow creature's false promises, or of Mimic, who struck from behind at the most critical moment.
this was front and center. But even so, in her current state, she would have trouble fending off a fly. Okoro raised the vial slightly, watching her with an air of calculated patience.
The mist of time is quite valuable.
He remarked, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone.
More valuable than you, certainly. So, why not make this easy on yourself?
Melara's fingers twitched, the urge to lash out with magic nearly overwhelming. But she took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She weighed her options, realizing that her only chance was to buy herself a moment.
I won't unbind the curse,
Melara said, her voice firm even as her heart hammered in her chest.
I won't give you what you want.
Okoro's eyes narrowed and his smile twisted into something cold and dangerous.
You misunderstand me, witch.
He said softly, the words laced with menace.
This was never a request.
Melara didn't hesitate. Before Okoro could react, she whispered the incantation under her breath, activating the curse she had placed on the fragment of thorn. Okoro's eyes widened, and he let out a sharp cry as the curse took hold. A dark tendril of magic lashing out and coiling around his arm. The shock caused him to lose his grip on the vial, and it fell to the ground with a dull thud. Without wasting a second, Melara lunged forward, snatching up the vial and clutching it tightly in her hand. She summoned the last of her strength and conjured shadow clones, each one an identical copy of herself. The shadows rippled and shifted, surrounding Okoro in a whirlwind of illusions. She knew the clones wouldn't fool him for long, nor would the curse kill him. But she needed time to run and think of something else. Okoro's voice cut through the darkness, laced with both pain and fury.
You think this will stop me?
He snarled, his golden eyes flashing dangerously. Melara's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic mess of fear, anger, and regret. She had hoped the curse would buy her more time, but Okoro's power was greater than she had anticipated. And now, she was running out of options. She heard the sound of Okoro's blade cutting through the illusions, felt the magic around her begin to unravel. Melara gritted her teeth, searching for a way to turn the tide. She couldn't let him take the mist of time. She couldn't let him end her here. She heard a sickeningly familiar laugh behind her. The same laughter that had echoed in her nightmares. The same laughter that had stolen everything she held dear. Chapter 3. The Hero and the Wolf. Melara steadied herself against a nearby tree, her breath shallow, heart hammering. The moon cast an eerie light on the forest floor, and the air grew thick with tension as Okoro circled her like a predator, awaiting the perfect moment to strike. Blood trickled from her wound, and each pulse was a painful reminder of how close to death she was dancing.
You think this will make you strong enough to face the Ember Sentinel?
She taunted, her voice a strained whisper of defiance.
Even with that stolen root fragment, he'll turn you to cinders before you draw your blade. Or do you believe the wild child will let you live?
Okoro's smile twitched into something almost feral.
I've felt creatures greater than you, witch.
He hissed.
Your head will be my newest trophy.
Before he could finish, Melara's eyes flared with defiance. With a surge of sheer willpower, she gathered the last of her magic, launching a volley of violet fire. The spell hurtled towards Okoro, but with a swift flick of his wrist, he deflected it effortlessly, his golden eyes gleaming with amusement. He drew his sword, a blade that shimmered with the sunlit brilliance, and advanced. Malara barely had time to think. She thrust her palms forward, weaving a lattice of protective energy, but Okoro sliced through it in one smooth motion, dispersing her magic like scattering ashes. His attacks were relentless, swift slashes aimed to end her. Malara ducked, dodging by mere inches as the blade cleaved through the air. She retaliated with a sweeping kick, but Okoro leapt over it, his cloak billowing like dark wings. Landing with a roll, he whipped his sword at her again, its arc catching the moonlight with a deadly gleam. Malara was barely able to dodge it. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each movement sending jolts of pain through her wounded side. She could feel the blood seeping beneath her fingers as she clutched the injury, the wound left by the damn pangolin that had ambushed her days before.
Curse that beast.
She hissed under her breath. She had to keep moving, had to keep fighting. Losing here meant more than death. It meant never discovering the truth of what had been taken from her.
I can't die without knowing.
She thought desperately.
I need to know what happened, the true, why everything was ripped away.
Okoro advanced, his movements precise and almost effortless. He was gaining the upper hand, his strikes coming faster and sharper with each passing moment. Malara blocked another swing, her arms trembling with strain. She tried to counter with a burst of dark energy, but the spell fizzled on her fingertips. Her depleted magic refused to answer. Images of her children's smiling faces and her husband's warm embrace flashed through her mind.
No, not like this. I can't face them like this, not without knowing. Not like this.
She screamed silently in her head.
Is this all you've got?
Okoro taunted, landing a shallow cut across her arm. Malara winced as the warmth of her blood trickled down. Her vision blurred, and suddenly she was back home, in the rolling hills of Ardath, where joy greeted her with open arms. She bit down on her lip hard enough to draw blood, anchoring herself in the present and trying to stay conscious. She had to win. She couldn't let it end like this, not when the truth was so close, just out of reach. She mustered every ounce of strength she had left and launched herself at Okoro, her blade moving in frantic arcs. He deflected each strike with ease, his expression almost bored, as if he were simply waiting for her to exhaust herself. Malara screamed in frustration, slashing wildly, pouring all her rage and desperation into every attack. But Okoro's defense remained impenetrable, his counterattacks brutal and methodical. She felt the sting of his blade as it cut across her side, and then again, grazing her cheek. The pain was relentless, but she couldn't stop. Not now.
This can't be the end,
Malara thought, a flicker of defiance cutting through her exhaustion.
I've survived too much, lost too much. There has to be more. There has to be a reason.
Okoro's next strike came with a swiftness she could barely track, and she just managed to deflect it, the force of the blow sending her stumbling backward. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself to stay upright, her legs trembling beneath her. Blood dripped from her wounds, staining the earth beneath her. For a moment, the ground seemed to change into a field of vibrant flowers from Lunar Vale. Malara blinked away the illusion and tightened her grip on her weapon, refusing to let go.
You're stubborn, I'll give you that.
Okoro sneered, his golden eyes gleaming with satisfaction.
But this is the end for you, Malara.
Malara shook her head, refusing to accept his words. She wouldn't die here, not without fighting to her last breath. She tightened her hold on her magic, summoning shadows to cloak herself as she searched for an opening. But her strength was fading, and the edges of her consciousness began to blur. She could hear the distant echoes of her children's and husband's laughter, calling to her, inviting her to rest.
No,
She thought fiercely.
not yet. Your fate is already sealed, Okoro.
Malara taunted, her voice wavering with forced bravado.
You'll be burned to cinders or ripped apart.
She laughed wildly, her voice tinged with desperation.
The fragment of thorn won't save you. My curse will only grow stronger with my death.
It was a lie, but she hoped it would buy her more time. But Okoro had already decided on her fate long before their deal. He would end the witch and claim even more fame and glory. His name would reach further and wider, and the prestige and celebrity status would bring him wealth, influence, and power. The Ember Sentinel, the Wild Child, and even the Accord wouldn't dare to challenge him. Drunk on these thoughts, Akoro let out a low, calculated laugh. Before Akoro's blade could descend, Malara felt it a crushing sense of powerlessness, weightlessness, and insignificance. She could hear her husband screaming for her to run, her children crying out for help. She had been frozen, completely useless. The moment flashed before her eyes. The shadow's offer, the dark promise whispered in her moment of fear and desperation. The need to save what she held dear, to be strong enough to protect them all. Was it so wrong to ask for power? Not just for her own sake, but for those she loved? But the price had been greater than she ever imagined. Her life? Yes, that she could have given willingly. But instead, it had taken everything. Her family, her future. All lies, whispered in the darkness. Even now, in the final moments of her life, the shadows mocked her with their deceit. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it a chill that seeped into Akoro and Malara's bones. Akoro hesitated, eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness for signs of movement. A low growl cut through the silence, followed by a voice. A voice soft yet commanding, laced with an ethereal authority.
Step away from her.
Akoro turned sharply, and his gaze locked onto a snow-white wolf standing at the edge of the clearing, its fur glowing faintly in the moonlight. Malara's heart leapt with recognition, but she held her breath, forcing herself to remain still.
Who in the abyss are you?
Akoro demanded, raising his sword in challenge. The wolf's eyes narrowed, and a beam of moonlight pierced the sky, illuminating its form. The air shimmered as moonbeams coalesced around the creature, forming luminous threads. Without a word, the wolf lowered its head, and the threads shot forward like falling stars, each one crackling with ancient energy. Akoro swung his blade with precision, cutting through the beams in swift, calculated strikes. He moved with a practiced grace, deflecting each attack before it could touch him. His movements were so fluid, so deliberate, that it seemed he had been training for this moment his entire life. The wolf let out a piercing howl, and white smoke began to pour from its paws, spreading like a thick fog through the clearing. Shadows writhed within the mist, taking on the shape of spectral wolves with eyes that gleamed like burning embers. Akoro's expression remained cold and focused as he faced the spectral pack. He spun his sword in a tight arc, sending a wave of golden light that dispersed the first wave of spirits. But more emerged from the mist, each moving in a coordinated attack, teeth bared and glowing eyes locked onto their prey. Malara watched, her breath held, as Akoro engaged the spirits in a deadly dance. He spun and struck, his sword cleaving through spectral bodies with lethal precision. Just like his calculated cruelty, Akoro's skill was undeniable. Every movement was executed with ruthless efficiency. Every strike aimed to kill. One of the spectral wolves lunged, but Akoro sidestepped with inhuman speed, slashing through its form and dispersing it into smoke. He moved like a blur, dismantling the spirits one by one until the clearing was filled with nothing but swirling mist. Just as Akoro prepared to close in on the wolf, he sensed a distortion. A slight ripple in the air that sent his instincts screaming. He lunged forward, aiming to strike, but his blade cut through nothing but white smoke. He blinked, momentarily disoriented before realizing his mistake. From the mist, a massive paw emerged, its size dwarfing that of the spectral wolves. It struck with a force like a crashing wave, sending Akoro hurtling through the air. He twisted mid-flight, landing with a cat-like grace, but his balance faltered, and he staggered to his feet, breathing heavily. Akoro's eyes darted between the mist and the wolf, which had now transformed into a young girl, Luna. The air around her shimmered with residual moonlight, gathering at her fingertips like liquid starlight. She stood poised to strike, and the air crackled with latent power. A presence stirred, a pressure so intense and ancient that it seemed to crush the breath from Akoro's lungs. His instincts screamed at him to flee, and for the first time in their encounter, he felt a twinge of fear. The realization dawned on him like a slow-rolling storm. This wasn't just any wolf spirit.
You.
He muttered, his voice barely audible, eyes widening in recognition.
The guardian of Lunar Vale.
He had heard rumors, whispers of a guardian spirit tied to the moon's ancient magic, but he had dismissed them as myths. Now, faced with this overwhelming power, he knew he had made a grave miscalculation. Okoro's grip tightened around his sword, but he didn't dare raise it.
Damn you.
He hissed, the bitterness of defeat tainting his words.
Another time.
With a final glare, he sheathed his blade and slipped into the shadows, retreating into the forest's depths. He knew better than to challenge a foe of this caliber without a plan, without understanding more. With the Ember Sentinel and the Wild Child already at his heels, he couldn't afford to make another enemy of this magnitude. As the mist began to dissipate, Melara exhaled, her entire body trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. Luna's form shimmered faintly, her eyes reflecting the moon's soft glow. Melara looked at the girl who had saved her, a mixture of relief and apprehension stirring in her chest. Luna, the guardian of Lunar Vale, had arrived just in time. Chapter 4. The Moon in the Vale. Luna's silhouette faded into clarity, the sight of her stirring a longing deep within Melara, a yearning for a home she could never return to, and the cold emptiness that had become her constant companion. She stared at the small vial in her palm, the liquid within shifting under the moonlight. It whispered of a life she had once known, of a future she had lost. Her jaw tightened as she fought to keep the memories at bay. Reminiscing was a luxury she couldn't afford. The forest around them hummed with quiet magic, faint glimmers in the moss and whispers between the trees. And then, that childlike giggle again, mocking and annoying, lingering at the edge of hearing like a teasing echo. Melara's irritation flared, but she forced herself to stay composed. She turned to face Luna, whose expression remained open and unguarded.
Luna, you shouldn't have interfered.
Melara said softly, trying to keep her voice steady.
Auntie Melara, you're hurt.
Luna's voice held no fear, only a genuine concern.
You should come back to Lunar Vale and rest. Everyone would be so happy to see you again.
Melara's heart ached at the mention of home.
It's not that simple, Luna.
She whispered, her voice heavy with the weight of unspoken pain.
Of course it is.
Luna beamed, her eyes shining with childlike excitement.
You've only been gone a moment, just a blink. Everything is still waiting for you. You belong there, you know.
Melara felt the words like a knife twisting in her chest. To Luna, time was fleeting, a blur of days that held little consequence. But for Melara, the passage of time had stolen everything she once held dear. She closed her eyes, trying to shield herself from the flood of memories, but they surged forth unbidden. She could see her daughter, eyes alight with wonder, twirling in the garden and saying,
When I grow up, I want to be like Luna, Mama, brave and strong.
Melara had smiled then, tucking a flower behind her daughter's ear and whispering,
With that much power, you could stand by the Queen's side.
She could hear her son's giggles, see his tiny fists clutching a makeshift sword as he pretended to be a great knight defending their home. And she could remember the warmth of her husband's arms around her, always steady, always ready to help in moments of need. The memories were so vivid, so painfully clear. Her children's faces, their laughter, her husband's quiet strength, all gone, and yet so achingly close.
I'm in the middle of my labors.
Luna continued, oblivious to Melara's turmoil.
I've just completed one. I'll be a true guardian of Lunar Vale soon. Isn't that wonderful?
Melara swallowed hard, forcing herself to respond.
That's wonderful, Luna. You've grown so much.
Luna tilted her head, frowning in confusion.
I haven't grown, Auntie. I've always been like this. You're the one who left.
Melara felt the words like a blow. For Luna, nothing had changed. Nothing had ever changed. Time in Lunar Vale was a circle, unbroken and endless. But for Melara, every moment was a reminder of what she had lost, a future she could never have.
You should come back.
Luna insisted, her voice gentle and insistent.
You'll be happy again.
Melara opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain the weight of her choices to someone who saw the world in such simple terms? How could she make Luna understand the pain of losing a life she had once cherished? She thought of her daughter's bright eyes and innocent dreams, her son's laughter and fearless heart. She thought of her husband, always fixing things, always strong and sure. What would they be like now if they were still alive? What would her daughter's voice sound like as she grew older, wiser? How proud her son would have been when he finally wielded a real sword. What would it have felt like to grow old with the man she loved? How much more laughter they could have shared. How many more moments of joy she could have held on to. Melara felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. The life she had been robbed of. The memories that would never be made. She had thought that power would give her the means to protect her family, but all it had brought her was endless regret.
I can't.
Melara said finally, her voice breaking.
I can't go back, Luna. Not now.
Luna's smile faltered, and she reached into the pocket of her cloak, pulling out a small object. A single moon grain, shaped like a perfect grain of rice.
Take this.
She said, pressing it into Melara's hand.
It will help you find your way home when you're ready.
Melara stared at the moon grain, her heart aching. The moon grain was a token of the Vale, a way for its people to return home. But Melara knew that the path was closed to her. She had severed that connection long ago, and no amount of magic could bring it back. Still, she took the moon grain, her fingers closing around it.
Thank you,
she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Luna's eyes brightened again, her smile returning.
I'll see you soon then,
she said, her voice brimming with hope. And with that, she vanished into the night, her form shimmering like stardust as she disappeared into the shadows of the forest. Melara stood there for a long moment, staring at the place where Luna had been. When she was certain Luna was gone, she let her mask crumble. She sank to her knees beside the lake, tears burning her eyes as the memories overwhelmed her. She had lost everything: her family, her home, her future, and all for a promise of power that had twisted into something dark and terrible. She had made a choice, and she had paid the price. But the guilt and regret still gnawed at her, whispering that it was all her fault. She had been so certain she could protect them, so certain that she could change her fate. But she had only shattered everything she loved. The pain was too much to bear, and Melara let out a broken sob, clutching the ground as if it could anchor her to something real. She could still hear her children's voices, her husband's laughter, echoes of a life that was no longer hers. And then, just as the despair threatened to consume her completely, a sound cut through the darkness. A child's giggle, clear and unmistakable, ringing out in full display. Chapter 5. The Sprite's Warning. Melara stiffened, her tear-streaked face lifting toward the source of the giggle, a sound she recognized all too well. It was light and mischievous, a noise that grated against her nerves even in the calmest moments. There was only one being it could belong to: Lyric. The queen of the sprites flitted into view, her radiant orb-like form shimmering in the moonlight, trailing magic like a playful comet. Lyric giggled again, hovering effortlessly in front of Melara, her wings creating a whirl of shimmering dust that danced in the moon's glow.
Well, well,
Lyric sang, her voice a lilt of mockery and mischief.
Oh dear Melara, still stumbling through shadows and thorns, or perhaps chasing the light you let slip away.
Melara clenched her jaw. Lyric's riddles always seemed to come at the worst possible moments, taunting her when she least needed it. She tried to keep her voice even.
Got tired of eavesdropping?
Lyric twirled in the air, a mischievous smile playing at the corner of her lips.
Eavesdropping? Such a crude word for simply being where the whispers are.
Melara sighed, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. She was far too tired to keep playing games.
Fine then. What do you want, Lyric?
Lyric's eyes gleamed with mischief.
Ah, but you're asking the wrong question, as always. Shouldn't you ask, what is wanted of you?
Melara scowled, already regretting indulging the sprite.
What is wanted of me?
She repeated, her irritation growing. Lyric's giggle deepened, turning into a soft, melodious hum.
Oh, sweet Malara, so much focus on what was broken, what was lost. And yet, you hold no key, no chain, to bind what lies beyond.
She paused, her tone shifting from playful to ominous.
The codex that keeps the veil. What good is a door left closed if there is no one to open it?
Malara's eyes narrowed. The codex was a relic she had once tried to obtain, with Mimic by her side until his betrayal when he sided with the three siblings.
No matter,
She thought bitterly.
the fall of the tower ended it all. Mimic, the children, and the book.
She frowned, trying to decipher Lyric's words.
The codex.
She muttered.
It was lost with the tower.
Lyric's expression shifted from gleeful to somber in an instant. Her voice dropped to a whisper, almost conspiratorial.
The tower may have crumbled, dear one, but not everything was lost. The three siblings, the clever ones, they still hold what was stolen. And Mimic, that sly shadow, waits with them.
Malara felt a surge of anger run down her spine. More betrayal. More lies. When does it all end? Her life seemed like a web spun from deceit, each thread pulling her further away from the truth.
What do you gain from this?
Malara asked, voice tight with anger and suspicion. Lyric's eyes twinkled with amusement and smile widened, but there was a flicker of something else in her gaze. Something sharp, like a glint of steel hidden beneath velvet.
Time moves forward, dear Malara, even when it loops back on itself. The siblings, so young and trusting, but clever. They have their little guardian to protect them. But you hold the thread that could unravel it all. Why not pull at it?
The implications of Lyric's words hung heavy in the air. Malara could feel the weight of them pressing down on her, but she couldn't yet grasp their full meaning. It was like trying to see through a dense fog with only flashes of clarity revealing glimpses of the path ahead. Lyric's expression softened, almost pitying.
You seek what you have lost, but the answers lie with those who still hold what remains. To unlock the past, you must face the ones who keep the codex and the shadow that guards it.
What if I don't go?
Malara asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. She just wanted to rest. Her mind and body felt completely drained. Lyric's giggle was softer this time, almost sad.
Ah, but you will go, dear Malara. You can't help yourself. It's in your nature to seek what was taken, even if it costs you everything.
Malara felt a shiver of recognition run through her. Lyric's words echoed her own thoughts. Thoughts she had buried deep. Thoughts of a past she couldn't let go of. She had lost everything in one terrible moment, and no matter how much she tried to move forward, she was always looking back, searching for the missing pieces. Lyric drifted closer, her voice turning gentle, almost motherly.
The veil wears thin, Malara. If you do not act, the Veil Keeper's secret will be lost forever, and with it, the key to your past. Perhaps you will find peace, or perhaps you will find what you were never meant to know.
Malara's fingers tightened into fists, her mind racing with the implications of Lyric's riddles. With the codex, she could properly harness the power of the mist of time. She would be able to witness it all, hear it all, the whole truth. Lyric's eyes gleamed, knowing full well of Malara's decision.
The dance is far from over, and your steps are yet to be written.
With a final cryptic laugh, Lyric flitted away, her form shimmering in the moonlight until she vanished completely, leaving Malara alone once more. Malara let out a slow, measured breath, her mind racing with the implications of what Lyric had said. She looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of her choices, the echoes of her past reverberating through her very soul. She had survived this long, and she would continue to survive, no matter what it took, because she had no other choice. The truth of her deal, the lost memories of that night, her loving family. She must know. She needs to know. And as the night deepened, Malara felt the weight of her memories pressing down on her once more. Just as she began to sink beneath them, a sound broke through the darkness. A laughter. Deep, cruel, and mocking. The same dark laugh that crackled in her nightmares, the very same one that had taken everything from her. It echoed through the enchanted forest, reverberating through the trees like a sinister wind. The laughter lingered, each eerie note stretching into the silence until Melara couldn't tell whether the sound came from the forest's shadows or from within her own soul. Thank you for joining me on the journey through Melara's Lament. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who love a good tale. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of the cast of characters and the twists in the story? Your feedback means a lot to me. And stay put, because more amazing stories are going to pop up on the screen soon. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep your imagination alive.
Wow.